So I lead what is called Premium Classic Brands for Marriott International. Been with the company for about 2 years. That means that I am responsible for the Marriott Hotels brand and the Sheraton Hotels and Resorts brand globally. As well as recently, I undertook our expansion into the all-inclusive space across all of our premium upscale brands. So not the luxury, but everything below luxury. So about 1,150 hotels and resorts globally within my portfolio, out of about 8,800 that are flagged with a Marriott brand somewhere in the world. Those two brands are two of our four biggest brands, and they're the flagship brands for the Marriott portfolio and then the Starwood portfolio, which we acquired in 2016. Prior to coming to Marriott, I grew up in CPG, spent a long time up the road in Pennsylvania at the Hershey Company, and was a traditional CPG brand marketer. Then I took over the sponsorships, promotions, partnerships department for Marriott and led that for a number of years. And then took a fairly big pivot about 7 years ago and moved down to the DMV, started working at Constellation Energy. So moving from candy CPG to the energy space. Had a great experience there. We were doing a lot of very meaningful things, but I missed consumer marketing in the energy space, heavily B2B. But I learned a lot about buildings, which actually helps me in my current job. So I'm kind of blending things that I learned along the way, whether it be in CPG or in the energy space. One of the last things that I did before I left Constellation was I hired Jared, who's sitting in the back, who works at Constellation now. I'd like to apologize to McCormick because I hired him from McCormick. So he's doing pretty kick-ass work at Constellation today. So he will be part of my legacy at Constellation. But yeah, I've met Marriott now. I've been there for it'll be 2 years tomorrow, and having a wonderful experience leading these two iconic brands.
So from CPG into hospitality, that feels like a hard left for a lot of people. You and I were talking about that. I thought it was interesting how you drew some similarities. Do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, so when I interviewed, I talked a lot about passion points and the role that confection has in your lives, your traditions, your rituals, similar to travel. And I do think there are a lot of parallels there. What I didn't understand, I probably would have interviewed better had I known at the time, is how similar my job is on a day-to-day basis. Because much like in CPG, where we didn't own the retail, and I was selling my strategy to Walmart, CVS, Kroger, et cetera, to get them to, how does my strategy make money for you? I'm doing the same thing every day. I'm just doing it with a different stakeholder in the hospitality industry because we don't own the hotels. We own a handful of those 8,800 hotels globally. We manage about half of them on behalf of ownership. But for the most part, it's a franchise business, and increasingly so. When you get up to the higher ends of luxury, we manage most of those even though we don't own them. When you're on the lower end of what we call select service, those are almost exclusively franchised, especially in North America. So again, I just went back to the same sales job that I had before, which was, how does my strategy make money for you? Because if you don't implement it, I don't make money and you don't make money. So it's a very similar mindset. It's just with a different stakeholder group.
Inspira is an experiential marketing agency which we really rooted in hospitality. So shout out to Brand Innovators for pairing us up because I was excited about the topic of hospitality. What's inspired you about entering into the world of hospitality? What sort of gets you excited about that? Because there is some similarities in terms of you're owning the brand and the strategy, but not the execution, as you just mentioned. What's sort of a part of hospitality that you feel like just keeps putting wind in your sails and keeps you excited?
One thing is the resilience. If you would have told me at the beginning of COVID, and especially when Marriott and Hilton and others made announcements about furloughs and just the industry came to a screeching halt, that I would be several years later leaving a job in a very strong growing energy company to go work in hospitality, I would have thought that was crazy. But travel has such a meaningful role in our lives, whether it be business related or leisure related. And as a result, it's extremely resilient. I also really enjoy when I worked at Hershey, in the candy category, you win at store. Point of sale, display, it's all about at retail, and I enjoy being back in the physical space and dealing with physical structures and a physical product. We've talked a lot about hospitality over the course of the last hour between Amtrak and then the restaurants. And for anybody that hasn't read it, I would highly recommend a book called Unreasonable Hospitality by Will Guidara, who's a restaurateur. It is a phenomenal book, regardless of the industry that you're in. If you work in a service-related product, I absolutely recommend it to anybody. And it just shows the important role that we have, whether or not you're a marketer or a waiter, in connecting with people and improving their lives and the little things that you can do on a day-to-day basis. So I think that's what wakes me up happy every day.
The book on Unreasonable Hospitality, we were referencing that. It's a Bible within our own agency. Everyone that joins our company gets a copy of the book. One of the things we loved was the anecdote that Will Guidara talks about is running a top 4-star restaurant and having New Yorkers come in and say, we've had the phenomenal meal experience, but one thing we haven't experienced yet is the New York hot dog, dirty water dogs, as we call them in New York. And, he, as the owner of the restaurant, went above and beyond and really did something pretty radical where he went out and got hot dogs for those guests while they were enjoying their dinner experience and had their chefs just reinvent the hot dog with all these sauces and spices, and just something like that to pivot from amazing food on the menu, this high-end experience, and to bring that accessibility is something that's really refreshing to think about, like thinking outside the lines of the hospitality. When we were talking, I think it was interesting to me too, you just mentioned you would have interviewed better had you known. What was the job description your boss outlined for you when you first came on? I thought this was really interesting when we were talking.
So not the written job description that the recruiter sent to me, but my first informal conversation before we got into the formal interviews with my then boss, who has since taken a role with Marriott over in Asia Pacific, was fix Marriott, don't break Sheraton.
Is it fix Sheraton?
Fix Sheraton, don't break Marriott.
Yeah.
That makes a heck of a lot more sense.
I was going to say, I got it wrong here. So fix Sheraton, that sounds like it has a bit more urgency applied to it than staying the course for Marriott. So can we talk about Sheraton a little bit? What was the meaning behind that? Why fix Sheraton? Okay, so all of you people here are brand folks, so I think that this will resonate with you. Why do brands exist in the world regardless of industry? It's to create trust and an expectation of what you're going to get. Within the hospitality industry, there is an acceptable range because the age of the hotel, the location, the service experience, et cetera. But the acceptable range is like here. So with Sheraton, we're like right here. So a big piece of my job is to push these two things back together. So with no disrespect to the leadership at Starwood prior to the Marriott acquisition, for a number of years, the company had not really, they were so focused on growth of their other brands that they had not worked with ownership to invest in renovation, guest experience, but primarily it's a product problem, and it's really focused here in US and Canada, which the product is very, very dated. And what happens is that oftentimes the morale of working in a very dated hotel drives the service experience. So there is a real correlation between renovation or newness of the hotel and how well the staff service is delivered and scored by guests. So basically, things went south in a hurry for Sheraton, and we inherited a brand that is now 87 years old. It is one of the most global brands in the industry. It has premium real estate in cities across the world. We just opened our 100th in Greater China. It's the first. It was the first non-Chinese brand to have a hotel in China, and it is the only brand that has that many hotels, regardless. Even like the small little Courtyards and Hamptons and Fairfield Inns. There's not another brand that has 100 in China. So it's a very big, important brand, and it's too big to fail. So how do we fix that guest service experience? It begins with working with ownership to invest in the product. When we say product in the hospitality industry, in the hotel industry, we're talking about the physical box. For me, as a brand guy, I think of the product more holistically, of the entirety of the experience, from the time that you decide that I want to book until the time that you leave and talk to your friends about how wonderful or not so wonderful the experience at that Sheraton was.
However, when we talk about it, typically we talk about the physical box. So in the case of these hotels, how do we get people to invest in renovation? And coming out of the acquisition, a lot of work was done on the strategy for what the new Sheraton would look like, and we started to make some headway. And then all of a sudden, COVID hit, and everything came to a screeching halt, not just for Sheraton, but for the industry. So then, coming out the other side of that, ran into a couple of different problems. Number one, Marriott was fairly insulated because we didn't own the real estate and didn't have debt that we were paying on during the pandemic. But our owners were hurting. Their reserves were down. Their stock prices tanked, and they're still several years later digging out. Also, too, as all of you know, interest rates are at all-time highs, and we're hoping here to have one or two cuts before the end of the year. But capital markets are tight, and lenders also, quite frankly, because Sheraton has some tarnish on it, especially in U.S. and Canada, they're not always as apt to lend a dollar for a Sheraton renovation when they could lend it to a different company or the same company that also owns a Hilton to renovate their Hilton or their Marriott. So a lot of things to overcome. So we have started to make some headway again. We are at, as of today, 58 properties that are fully transformed on strategy, totally kicking butt and taking names. That's, though, out of about 435. So 17-ish% of the portfolio. We've got a lot more coming on the way, including some really large ones over the course of the next few months, which will help from a perception perspective. But that's just a fraction of the portfolio. So one of the things that we've had to do is go out to the hotel community, not just the ownership community, but GMs, associates, et cetera, and re-engage them and help them understand that you can't sit on your hands and wait for renovation to come save you. You got to be doing something. Now, renovation will help, and it will drive all of your metrics, including your service scores, because there'll be this cardiac paddle of energy to your associates when you have a renovated product. But until then, we got to be doing something. So we've invested in a lot of training programs, associate culture programs. I heard the gentleman in the last panel say back of house. Back of house is extremely important. It's as important in our industry as the front of the house, even though you as a guest don't see it. And then also some guest programming to pull our positioning through in a meaningful way. So the Sheraton positioning is around the world's gathering place because it is an international brand. It is traditionally has been in, because it was an early entry into a lot of big metropolitan areas, it has great real estate on a corner, on a public square. So it's always been about that energy and that engagement in the public space. So one of the things we've been doing with Sheraton, renovated or not, is to develop and implement a program called Gatherings by Sheraton, where we, on a weekly, twice weekly. The brand standard is 2 times a month, but it typically is as much as twice a week, depending upon the hotel and how engaged the hotel is. Have what is called a gathering by Sheraton. So we deal with other people's money. We go out to the community, and the GM or somebody on their team engages could be an art expo, could be a farmer's market, could be whatever. We've developed toolkits and guidance as to different inspirational things that you can do, but it's really up to the hotel and what they want to do in their community. How do we bring people into the lobby, create a high energy public space? One of my favorites is a program that Sheraton Denver Downtown developed, which is called Puppies and Pinot, where
Puppies and Pinot. Let that sink in. You had me at puppies, but Pinot.
So twice a month, they have a deal with the ASPCA that brings in adoptable dogs, and in their public space, they have adoptable puppies, and they have wine tastings, and even sometimes wine pairings, where a Bernese and a Cabernet. So it's just really fun. And one of the things that's happened here is a lot of times within our industry, especially on the franchise side, we have brand standards, we have brand standard audits, but there's only so many things that we can audit, and we can tell people very specifically, do exactly this. So a lot of our winning and losing is by how do we provide them freedom within the framework and an inspiration to go out and do something themselves, but then it all kind of feels like it's from the same brand and from the same family. So what's happened here is that you have some very creative folks, and it doesn't need to be somebody senior leadership that's on the executive team of the hotel or the GM. Somebody within the hotel has a great idea. They come to the GM. They're like, hey, I'd like to try this. GM says, great. And next thing you know, we have a gathering by Sheraton. So really making a ton of progress on the brand between the momentum we have in renovations and then also just guest experience improvements that we've had in the non-renovated hotels. We're now to the point where finally, and our owners that were early adopters of some of the renovation strategy and the new design, were knocking on our door for a long time, like, hey, when are we going to talk about this? When's it going to be a big deal? When are we going to have the global advertising campaign? Well, at that time, we didn't have enough critical mass, and the distance between the good Sheraton and the bad Sheraton was still out here. So in 2025, we'll be doing our first global advertising campaign for Sheraton to kind of pull the sheet off the car at the car show, so to speak, of what the new Sheraton is all about. The first time since the Starwood acquisition in 2016.
I love that. The Puppies and Pinot, such a local grassroots, event. It's got authenticity. It helps, going back to the unreasonable hospitality that we started the conversation with. It's thinking outside the lines of how do you enhance the guest experience when the property may or may not be the latest and greatest. It's more about an experience, which speaks to me. Are there any national, beyond the local grassroots, any more partnerships or anything else you've done to sort of incorporate into that gatherings by Sheraton?
Yeah, so we're working on a second one that hasn't been finalized and announced yet, but we are starting year 2 of a relationship we have with Hello Sunshine, which is Reese's Book Club, and that's a global partnership. And what we did at a national level was we picked a number of tentpole hotels to build out a full lobby library, and that moved around the world and had stops in different continents. But then what we've also done is within all the hotels, they have the ability to execute small lending libraries. They have advanced access to get the next book for next month. Book clubs are becoming an increasing way for people to leverage our public space with Sheraton, especially the redesigned, fully renovated Sheratons. It is really meant to be an active, high energy public space. So we want people to show up early, stay late, and have different things to do throughout the course of the day. So we openly invite people from the community to come spend time in the hotel. You don't have to be a guest because we know that you'll buy some food and beverage. So we host book clubs. You can do them just in the out and about. You can book one of our bookable studio spaces in the renovated Sheratons. So it's been a great partnership and gotten a lot of momentum. It's funny because traditionally, in U.S. and Canada in particular, our ownership structure is largely private equity or REITs. And I don't think I'm saying anything that people wouldn't think about. They tend to be run largely by boomer white men. And when we have franchise advisory boards and we talk to them and, hey, this is what we're doing, people are like, book club. Now, when they heard Reese Witherspoon's name, they got a little bit more excited about it. But the idea of a global partnership around a book club and a lending library in the lobby was foreign to these guys. But fortunately, they bear with us, and it's showing great results.
So it sounds like you're well on your way to meeting that job description of fix Sheraton. All right. It's funny you say that. So we're now just at that point where we're turning the corner. And the challenge, and I was telling the woman who's the global brand leader for Sheraton on my team, her challenge over the course of the next 18 months is to simultaneously evangelize and spread the good news that we're making real progress while ensuring that nobody mishears and thinks that the burning fire is out. And that, because now is not the time where we take the foot off the gas. We need to continue, whether or not it's internally at Marriott International or it's within our ownership, push to continue to drive that momentum. But oftentimes when you say, hey, look at these numbers, the business performance metrics and the customer satisfaction metrics are really rebounding, people will be like, okay, great. And when you got 35 brands, it's easy to, squirrel, and look over here. That's a balance for us, which is to remind people that the job ain't done. So that's fantastic. So fix Sheraton, don't break Marriott. Have you broken Marriott, or should we ladder up to talk a little bit about
I wouldn't say
Marriott?
It's broken. So it's before I arrived, the company was undertaking a repositioning for the Marriott Hotels flagship brand. Repositioning is probably an overstatement. It's literally true. But what had happened was about, call it now, 12, 14 years ago, the product for Marriott was getting very dated, not to the point where Sheraton is now, but we needed to kind of reinvent the product. If you remember all the old like red and yellow rooms that used to have in a Marriott, it was getting pretty bad. So we reinvested to get the renovations done and get the a little bit more modern version of not your grandfather's Marriott, so to speak. But at that time, the company decided to, based on some research that they had that arguably was a little flawed, was reposition the brand in a little bit too much of an aspirational space and lost its way a little bit. And really this positioning work that we've done, the refresh, is just a return to the authentic core of the brand. So I guess you could say like our breaking of Marriott is taking literally 65 steps back so that we can take a whole bunch of steps forward, because we're just going back to what made this brand great to begin with. And that's really, you said about at your company, the unreasonable hospitality being the Bible. That is for Marriott hotels, like the same deal. Now, at the time that the positioning work was going on, and as we're starting to pull this positioning through across all of our touch points, it wasn't intentional. In fact, most people were not aware of the book yet and hadn't read it, but it's kind of in parallel been like, wow, this is exactly what we're talking about. So our positioning language, and it is consumer facing for the brand, is wonderful hospitality always, but it's really about how do you connect with people on a human level. And I heard somebody on the last panel say about meet them where they are. That is part and parcel to what made Marriott International first through Marriott brand successful, but what has made Marriott Hotels brand successful for many years. Mr. Marriott's credo is take care of your people, they'll take care of the guests, and the guests will come back again and again. So it's very much a people-centric culture company-wide, but with this being the original flagship brand, that is part of the DNA of this brand. So I'd say that if we're breaking it right now, it's we are undoing some things that were done that were not on brand and had been off brand for quite some time, and returning to the authentic core. And now that we rolled out this positioning work last year, it's about ensuring that whether or not it's the physical space, it's the associate experience, it's the guest experience, it's programming, that all of those touch points sing from the same sheet of music.
That's great. So keeping with that, the North Star, the DNA of the brand for Marriott, wonderful hospitality always, as you just mentioned. Can you give a tangible example? When we were talking, I thought you'd get a great example of down in Grand Cayman.
Oh yeah. Okay. So this goes back to the conversation about it's a Marriott property, but it goes back to the conversation we were having about Sheraton, about that you don't necessarily have to be fully renovated and the physical box to be in its best state. You can overcome that with great service experience. So I would argue that on the other side, you can have a brand spanking new, just built last Thursday hotel, and if the service isn't great, you're going to have a poor guest experience. I would rather have a mediocre physical box that is run famously than a new hotel that is run poorly. So we have a Marriott resort in Grand Cayman that if you were to go and Google Google them right now and go to their website, their hero photo shows their pool deck touching the sea. They lost 100% of their beach over the course of the last 5 to 7 years due to storms and erosion. And their comp set, there are some amazing properties in Grand Cayman, and there are amazing properties across the Caribbean that you can choose from. Now, they did recently go through just finish a rooms renovation, which is a positive thing. But even before that, they had one of the highest guest experience scores for Marriott Hotels brand in Caribbean and Latin America. And it was really driven by the GM pulling everybody together and saying, hey, we lost what is arguably our greatest asset, which is our beach. How do we come together and overcome this as a team? For those of you who either played team sports growing up or are a fan of team sports, when the best player gets hurt, one of two things happens. Either everybody rallies together and takes it to the next level, or everything goes in the shit tank. So that's what he did at the time. Was the best player was the beach. They lost their best player. They realized he ain't coming back. So how do we buckle down and ensure that we have a top-notch service experience? And again, it's a fabulous property. Now, if you want to go to a beach, I'm not going to tell you to go there because you're not going to get the beach. But if you're looking for a great property in the Caribbean, I can't recommend it high enough.
I love that example because it just reinforces what we're talking about, the power of hospitality, overcoming that as a serious disadvantage, turn that into an advantage with some creativity and positioning. I know the segment was named Welcoming Owners and Guests. Valda, I appreciate thanking you for renaming it the last one before lunch, I thought we heard, as the session, which you will honor that. Just before we end the session, open it up to any questions to be able to talk about how Drew may or may not have fixed Sheraton and didn't break Marriott.
Yeah. First, thank you. That was awesome. I guess, I was really interested when you started talking about the training and the culture program. And the last example was, I think, a really shining one of team coming together and making the experience just better. I'm a big believer what's internal is external. And so as you go through these training programs, I'm just curious, what are the ones that you feel are most successful that bring the team together to create a best-in-class experience?
So our role at the above property level is to provide guidance, tools, and train the trainer type of approaches. Now we do have scalable training tools, but a video online never does the job. So we will go out and spend time with GMs globally. For instance, I'm headed to a GM conference in Asia Pacific in early September, and going to spend a couple of days out there and do breakouts with general managers for Marriott and Sheraton. And then it's incumbent upon really having great leadership. The GM is the CEO of the hotel, and if he or she is great, the hotel is great. If he or she isn't, it's a poor experience. But at the end of the day, their number one asset that's available to them, other than just being present and connecting with their associates, and you'd be surprised, like if you large hotels that the really good GMs know every single person's name and their kids' names and what they do, and from the housekeeper to the engineer. But I think that one of the greatest tools that they have besides that, like a formal tool, is daily stand-up. So every morning, get together in the we say the heart of the house as opposed to the back of the house, because we want to make it a little bit more meaningful and enriching, and talk about some things that are, hey, how was your weekend? Hey, I heard your kid had a birthday. What'd you do for the birthday? To we have these VIPs that are visiting this week. This is the group that's coming in. What's the report from housekeeping and the department heads from every single one of those departments? And then they have mini meetings with their own individual departments. So I think that level of, you can't connect with a guest if you don't connect with one another.
I think with that, we'll turn it over to, I think, a much anticipated segment here.
Yes.
Lunch.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
Nobody leave.